Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining our monthly webcast series. My name is Gustavo Hinojosa, Executive Director for the National Cybersecurity Student Association. Our presentation today will be Levers of Human Deception, the Science and Methodology Behind Social Engineering with Erich Kron, Security Awareness Advocate at KnowBe4. So no matter how much security technology we purchase, we still face fundamental security problems. People. This session will explore the different levers that social engineers and scam artists pull to make us more likely to do their bidding. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the presenter. Are you there, Eric?
Yes, I'm sorry. Had a little technical difficulty there. Sorry. Yeah, so we're going to get started on this levers of human deception. This is one of my favorite talks that I do because it's fascinating when you start getting into this the science and the psychology behind these sorts of attacks that are going on out here. And these are going on over and over and over again. We see it every day, but sometimes we don't understand what happens with the social engineering or what's driving it. So like I said, we're going to have some fun today. Hopefully we can learn some things, and we're going to answer some questions at the end, so please get those questions in, and I'm happy to talk about whatever I can. First of all, this is me on the screen here. Basically what it boils down to, I've been in IT and security for, wow, a very long time now. Since mid-1990s is really when I got into it. So back in the day of dial-up modems and things like that. And I've seen a lot of things throughout my time, right? One of the things that I realized early on is that humans have been and continue to be the target of attacks. We are the part that the bad guys have been going after for, eons. And some things just have never changed. They've become more sophisticated. But, back when I started off, we had the I love you virus. We had, things like that were going on even way back in the 1990s. So as time is moving on, they're progressing how they do this, and they're actually becoming much more efficient at what they're doing. So that's just kind of my background in a nutshell. I worked for the DoD for about 10 years. I've been in healthcare, and a couple certifications there. What's interesting, the company that I work for right now, it's called KnowBe4. And what we do security awareness training and a simulated phishing platform. So what we do is we teach users and people how to spot these phishing attacks. And then what we do is we turn around and we do simulated phishing attacks for these people. What this does is it helps the end users kind of be a little bit paranoid and all that. What's cool for me is because we have over 23,000 customers, I get to see a lot of these attacks. We have a reporting tool that people can use for free, and it can copy us on these attacks. So we get to see the trends. We get to see what the bad guys are doing. And I love looking at some of these, and I love picking them apart and going, okay, this is what they're accomplishing here. This is how they're trying to make people not think. And it's a very powerful thing. It really is. So moving on here. This is something been around for a while, right? And I love this quote: all warfare is based on deception. This is from Sun Tzu in The Art of War. So it's a couple of years old, just predates me by a few, but hey. What this is talking about, something that's been just timeless. And in our space these days, sometimes the term warfare is a little bit strong. And I do get that, right? Very rarely do people die in cyber attacks. However, it is impacting organizations very significantly. And not only that, I can tell you, well, not specifics, but I can tell you from being in the DoD and being the security manager at the organization that handled all of the network connections between the post camps and stations in North America, these attacks are real. And they're nation state attacks as well as individuals just trying to make money. In addition, We have terrorist groups and groups like that that actually raise a lot of funds through these sorts of attacks as well, through ransomware, things like that, and then use that money to carry out their missions, okay? So it is actually a pretty serious issue that we have here. And when it comes to these attacks, when it comes to phishing, um, these attacks start with deception, right? Different ways to deceive depending on what the attack is. They'll redirect focus. They'll do lots of different things like that in order to get their goals. But it really comes down to deception. So something that we do know in the industry is about 98% of attacks rely on some sort of social engineering, right? We also know that 91% of successful malicious data breaches start with the spear phishing attack. That means that these attackers are going for the humans. Now, what I can tell you is over the years, the trend that I've seen in working in the industry, we have really gotten good at defending our perimeters. And it may not always seem like it if you watch the news and you see what's going on with that, because it always seems like somebody's getting hit. But if you really start looking at those attacks, mostly it's the people. But we've gotten very good at perimeter defense. Where we still kind of fall apart is the stuff on the inside. So our servers, our workstations, endpoints, those tend to be a little bit laxer when it comes to the patching that's happening and those sorts of things, right? And the humans. So this is why the attackers go after the people. What we know is they work very much like a business. Okay, this isn't your kids in the basement with the hoodies eating drinking Mountain Dew, eating pizza, right? These are actually companies, and they look at things like return on investment. So they say, you know what, I can go ahead and I can spend 2 or 3 days trying to throw exploits out here, trying to get into their web server, get into their web apps, whatever. Or I can turn around and I can spend about 3 hours, put together a nice phishing attack, get on the inside, and then spread from there. This is a tried and true method. Now, if you ever have somebody come into your organization and do like penetration testing or red teaming, what they'll tell you almost 100% of the time is if they can't get in through the outside, if you give them the chance, if you allow them to attack the humans and do some social engineering, they're almost 100% proven to get in. All right. It is unfortunate, but it is how this happens. And because we don't have the insides all that well secured, what happens is they get into one machine and then they can pivot throughout the network on the backside. Again, the perimeter is very strong, but we still miss it a lot on the inside of the networks, right? They tend to be more vulnerable there. So what we're going to talk about today, with that in mind, we're going to talk about the perception versus reality dilemma. We're going to talk about something called the OODA loop. We're going to talk about how social engineers and scam artists subvert these things. And we're going to talk about how to defend ourselves and our organizations when it comes to these attacks. So let's start off with the perception versus reality dilemma. Now, we're going to do something here that is rarely attempted on the internet. We're going to do a card trick. So here's what we're going to do. Right now, I want you to pick a card. Pick any of these cards right here. Remember what card it is you pick, okay? Everyone got a card in their head? All right, here we go. And the magic of PowerPoint. Is that card gone now? I'm going to bet it is. How did we do that? How did we just do a magic trick on the internet? Well, it's actually pretty interesting. The way we did it is we started with this deck of cards. All right. Look for your card in there. I'll bet the card that you chose is in there. What we did is we ended with this deck of cards, or this hand of cards. If you'll notice, these are not the same cards. None of them are the same. So if you did say that your card was still there, I got bad news for you. That's not true. Basically, what happened here is these are two completely different sets of cards. By rushing people through the process and by not being aware of what was going to take place, you probably didn't notice. There's subtle clues that are built in here, right? If you'll notice, it's a red king, black king, red queen. You know, the pattern, the color pattern is even similar here, and that's set up to trick your mind. What we just did is we focused your attention on one thing, which is picking a card. so that you did not see the bigger thing going on around you. It's fascinating, but these are some of the ways that these attackers do that. They'll get you to focus on one thing while doing something somewhere else. Now, something we need to understand. We need to understand that our brain plays a role in what we perceive or what we see, okay, in perception there. So, what you see when you have something like this is, and how you best explain this is, as we grow up, as we get older, what happens is we develop our own filters. We expect certain things to happen in certain situations. Those sorts of things become second nature to us, right? Our brain actually starts applying these filters, and then they start to interpret and present a reality that is not necessarily what reality is, okay? How can I explain this? Well, how many of you remember a couple of years ago there was a dress, and everybody wanted to know what color the dress was, right? Is it blue and black, or is it white and gold? That was the big question. And people would be sitting right next to each other and see different colors, okay? This is your brain taking information and filtering it. It's an amazing thing. There were times when I could see one color, but most of the time I saw it as blue and black. My wife, no, she was white and gold. Also, just recently, there was the audio clip that was Yanni or Laurel, right? And there is some physical stuff that takes place in here, you know, with your hearing and things like that. But a lot of it is your brain filtering and removing that other part and then focusing on the one that you were able to hear. So it's important to understand that what is presented to our brain can be messed with. It can make it a little bit different, and there's tricks that they use to do that, right? So keep that in mind when you're looking at things, that what is being shown to you may not necessarily be reality. They're relying on your mental filters to interpret and present something different. Now,
Eric,
yes.
Real quick, your mic is a little low, or your sound, your voice.
All right. Is that any better?
Yeah, it's a little bit better. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Anything I can do to help. All right, so we're going to go in here. We're going to talk about the OODA loop. The OODA loop is a very interesting thing. It's basically 4 steps, and it's observe, orient, decide, and act. All right. As we get into this, first I'm going to start out with something a little bit of fun here. This is from the official CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception. This is really talking about, again, another form of focus redirection. All right. I used to smoke when I was younger. I have since quit, yay for me. What I can tell you is when somebody offers you a light and you're trying to light that cigarette on there, somebody has a flame very close to your face, right? Your focus tends to be right on that, trying not to burn your face off. It's a very strong focus on that. So in here, they're talking about how while that's going on, you can, with your other hand, drop something in their drink, or you can do something like that. I can tell you right now, if I'm focusing on a flame in front of my face, they could probably clear the table, and I would never know. So this is another way, another example of how we can take something and get you hyper-focused on one thing or another, and then perform a different action at the same time. The other thing we do is we use our brain to tell us what is a threat, okay? This is an example from the same wonderful book. On the left, the guy looks alert. On the right, looks like he's tired. Yes, the artists back when this thing was written were not the best in the world, but you get kind of the idea. Now, assume you're in an area and you're going to be talking about some things, and you want to look around and see if perhaps there's a threat around. Well, one of the things you're going to end up doing is you're going to look around and you're going to notice those people that are alert and looking around and seem to be aware. Your mind automatically discounts people that just look like they've had a really bad day and want a cold one and dinner to, you know, end their day. This is a psychological response. And so by having somebody look that way while actually being alert, that will let you let your guard down. You may talk about things that you otherwise wouldn't, right? I will tell you that this specific scenario, in the case of a zombie apocalypse, will be the end of us all because we're wired backwards when it comes to this, right? The one on the right is really the threat after the zombie apocalypse. So keep that in mind. We'll try to rewire our minds in case that happens. Now, what's important to understand, what we're about to talk about here, this OODA loop thing, this really goes back to what spies, magicians, pickpockets, cyber criminals, all these people use these kinds of principles, right? And that is the principle of trying to drive somebody past the critical thinking stage and directly into taking an action. This is their goal as these attackers, okay? So to give you an idea, the OODA loop, it's actually a model for decision making. And in this picture here, you can see in his visor, there are airplanes very near him. He's a Blue Angels pilot. The idea here is that there are all these things going on around him. And this was actually, the OODA loop was actually designed for aviation in situations like this, military aviation. And the idea is you have to be very careful with what you're doing. You have to make decisions very quickly. You have to adjust very quickly in these situations when you're flying at speed very close to other people. This whole thing actually came out of combat air. So when we look at this, understand that. Now, the OODA loop, the way that it works is you have these 4 different stages. You have observe, orient, decide, and act. So basically, you start off on the top there. You're going to observe. You're going to look around. You're going to say, okay, this is what's happening. Next step is you're going to orient yourself. You're going to say, where am I in the midst of the chaos that's going on around me, right? And then you decide what to do. That decision could be you do nothing. That decision could be, you take an action, you move a foot to the left, you move a foot to the right, whatever. You make that decision and then you act. Now, once you've done that, then you turn around and you observe where you are now. So you decided, you acted. Now, where am I now as I'm looking around what happened around me? Where am I in the middle of this? What actually happened based on that? And it's a constant loop that goes around. Now, I think it's interesting. John Boyd, who created the OODA loop, he made this quote here. And this was, again, in reference to military aviation. But he's talking about in order to win, we should operate at a faster tempo or rhythm than our adversaries, or better yet, get inside the adversary's OODA loop. Such activity will make us appear ambiguous or unpredictable, thereby generate confusion and disorder among our adversaries. What does that mean? Well, what they're going to focus on here when you try to do this is you try to disrupt the first 3 parts of that. Observe, orient, and decide are the critical thinking pieces in this section here, right? So they want to bypass your critical thinking. They want to get you straight to doing actions. They do this by hitting us with emotional things, right? Emotional triggers make us forget our critical thinking. This is what attackers do. This is what scam artists do. This is what con artists do. If you look at, one of the big ones that's going on these days is romance scams where, they prey on these people who meet them online and things go on. Well, they do all of these ridiculous things. They send all of this crazy money. And you can stand there from the outside and say, I can't believe that this person did this, okay? However, because they have hit them with emotional triggers, they're actually skipping the whole critical thinking part, driving straight into the action. That's how most of these work. So it's important to understand how these things happen, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about how they achieve the goals by subverting these components, right? Going past all of those critical thinking things. Now, if you
quick question, Eric.
Yes.
Your mic is coming in and out. It's possible to fix it? Yeah.
Let me see if I can up my mic level here just a little bit here.
It sounds like it's cutting in and out. Thank you.
All right. Is this doing any better right now?
It's a bit better, yeah.
You hearing me a little bit better? Okay, I'm sorry about
It's
that.
still a little choppy.
Is it? All right, 1 second. Let me see if I can. It might be the automatic whatever here. So let me see if I can just bypass that. All right, let's see what happens here.
Here we go.
Okay, let's see if that helps. Okay, so if it doesn't, let me know again. I'll try something else through the platform here. This is one of my favorite shows. It's called Mr. Robot. This is It's a show that, quite frankly, if you have young kids, you're not going to curl up on the couch and watch this show. But this is a show about hacking. And what's interesting about it is all of the exploits, all of the things that they use here are actual attacks. They're real attacks. It's not like CSI Cyber where, the guy sits down at the computer and hammers on the keyboard randomly for a minute and he's like, I'm through the firewall, I'm in, right? No, these are actual real attacks. They use real tools, real methods. One of the tools they use a lot is social engineering. So this quote, I love this quote from that. I've never found it hard to hack most people. If you listen to them, watch them, their vulnerabilities are like a neon sign screwed into their heads. This is such a true statement. I'll tell you, if you ever get a chance to go to DEF CON or some of the other, it happens at some of the other conferences as well, but DEF CON is a big one. They have what's called the Social Engineering Capture the Flag, or CTF, the SECTF. What they'll do is they actually have a soundproof booth that they put up on the stage. A few hundred people are out in the audience, and they have microphones inside this soundproof booth so you can hear what's going on. Well, the people that are competing in this is a capture the flag, so they get points for gathering information from organizations. So they'll do a little research on these organizations, and then they'll start phone calling these people, and they'll start asking them questions. They get points for finding out, like, what kind of antivirus do you have on your machine? What type of badges do you guys use in the organization? So they'll do something like someone will call up and say, hey, this is Bob over at the whatever branch. I'm having a lot of problems with my internet connection. I don't know if it's everybody. Are you having problems with that? Okay, cool. Maybe it's our antivirus. Let's see. When I look down here, I see that like I have that yellow shield. Do you guys have the yellow shield, or do you have another one? Oh, okay. You got the yellow shield. You're running Symantec. Okay, cool. So they do this to these people, and they use that those tactics to get information. Well, one of the first things they do in these attacks is they'll spend a little time, a lot of times, seeing how these people are going to react. So they will sometimes come through and be a little bit aggressive and see if that person responds by backing off and giving up and just letting people have the information, or whether they push back to aggression. They'll spend a little bit of time messing with people just to see, okay, which angle am I going to go at this with? Sometimes people are very, very helpful. They want to be very helpful. And so then you start presenting a sob story about how I'm going to lose my job if this doesn't work. You see, this is what we're talking about with human vulnerabilities. It doesn't take very long to figure out what's going on and how to exploit this with people, all right? So we take that, and then, as I said before, the ideal situation for a social engineer, which includes phishing, is to hijack that OODA loop by creating the knee-jerk reaction. And the best way to do that is through emotions. Now, here's an example of an attack we had last year. We saw this a lot. This is an actual reported email. This is one of many we saw. But this was put out there as a campus-wide security alert, all right? And so you'll see here, hello all, an emergency scare earlier reported on campus. Kindly go through the memo released and follow the outline protocol. Now, these folks had gone through and they'd found out this university used Microsoft as the email provider. So what they did is they pointed them to this portal down here, which is designed to capture credentials, all right? We saw this happen a lot. You can see down there in the bottom left, there were other variants, IT desk, security alert. We see different types of this. But these were being sent out during a time when emotions were very high and people were very upset about this. They just piggybacked right on there. They don't care if it hurts your feelings. They don't care if it upsets you. None of that matters to them. So they would just drive into this like that and get people to then enter their credentials and take over their email accounts. Once you have an email account, it's bad news for everybody involved at that point. So this leads to other kinds of attacks that are social engineering based. Business email compromise is one of the biggest attacks that's out there these days. It's also known as CEO fraud. What's interesting about business email compromise is especially like the wire transfer attacks. What makes them hard for technology to spot especially is there's usually no payload involved. In other words, there's no link, there's no document that's infected, there's none of that stuff that you would expect to see in a traditional attack, right? So it makes it very hard for technology to see it. Now, these tend to be very, very triggered. And the idea here is they'll send an email and they'll leverage the authority that is the CEO or an executive or somebody with authority in the organization to try to get them to wire out money, to try to get them to transfer out sensitive information. I'll give you an example of that here in just a second. But it's very, very tough. Now, when I first got started in this, phishing emails were actually fairly easy to spot. The misspellings, all that kind of stuff was really, really easy to see. However, these days, the bad guys have been innovating even more, and as a matter of fact, there's services on the dark web that you can use to, they actually go through your emails. You say, this is the email I'm going to send. They fix the grammar, they fix the spelling, they actually guarantee higher click rates based on using their services, right? This is a market. It's a very growing market. So those traditional tells are pretty much right out the door. Now, there are some times where they're actually used as well. Rumor has it a lot of these Nigerian prince attacks that are still going on these days. The idea is that they don't want the smart ones wasting their time. So if people are falling for things even with gross misspellings and things like that, odds are they're going to continue through on the other stuff. But for the most part, what we see, the spelling errors, all of that stuff is just, it's not a thing that you can rely on anymore. So it gets real tricky. Now, this is W-2 fraud. This is like the wire transfer fraud. And the wire transfer fraud, you know, what that usually looks like is the CEO or an executive sends an email, and it can start out very basic. It can start out with something like, hey, did you get my earlier email? And the target of that is usually somebody that controls money. You know, it could be a financial controller or someone in payroll, something like that. And they get this email from the executive, and it says, hey, did you get my earlier email? And these people will look around in their email, they don't see anything, and they respond back to the executive and say, you know, sir, ma'am, I'm sorry, I don't see what you sent me earlier. And that is usually followed pretty rapidly, sometimes in an automated sense, sometimes by an actual individual. And the response is usually much more aggressive. It'll say something like, I can't believe you can't find this. I sent it to you earlier today. We're acquiring a company, or we're doing this, or a vendor needs payment. They'll have some sort of a story behind it. It varies. But they'll say, I can't believe you messed this up. I need you to wire this money out to this account right now, and I'm going to have to go fix your problem, you know, what you messed up. And that can be downright scary for people. They're afraid they're going to lose their job, that they've made the CEO upset, that bad things are about to happen to them. So they panic and they wire the money out. Well, the same sort of thing can happen here, only with sensitive information, as I mentioned before. In this case, these are actual attacks that came into our organization. This was supposed to be from Stu Showerman, our CEO, going to one of our employees here. And, you know, as you can see, it basically said, I want you to get the W-2s. And instead of the money, what they're after here is tax forms. Now, the attackers do this every year. We see a lot of it every year. The attackers will get them to send all of the PDFs for the employees, or all of the W-2s in a PDF for all of the employees, and then they turn around and they file the income taxes on the behalf of all of the employees. Then what happens is, a little bit later, the employee goes to file their own taxes and find out it's already been done for them. This is a nightmare, right? The attackers, they end up, of course, always getting a refund. By the time the other individuals find out, it's usually far too late to get any of that back. Now, the individuals have to go and they have to file for special like PIN numbers or alternate tax IDs and all kinds of like jumping through hoops like that, because these attackers have used this sort of thing over and over again. And we do. We see it every year, and it's becoming more and more prolific, I think. Now, another thing we got going on here is to give you an idea of how these attacks look. You know, I mentioned the spelling errors are gone. This is one that's incredibly popular. And what happens with these is they're designed to just fit in the middle of everything else that's going on. So they're going to go to somebody who's in like accounts payable or things like that. And what they're going to do is they're going to try to mix in with all of the other legitimate invoices. Okay, that's one of the key things that happens. In this one, actually, though, this one can do another thing too. First of all, you'll notice if you look at it that there are no spelling or grammar errors. You'll notice that it's a very well put together email. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that over there it says ADP billing, and the reply address is message@adpr.com, not ADP. So there's a red flag right there going, okay, something's wrong. Generally on something like this, what they'll do is they will either attach a document, and if you click on the link, it doesn't go to where it's showing you there, obviously, okay? But they'll either attach an infected document, or they'll take you to a place where they want you to put in your credentials. So imagine if you're in an accounts payable sort of position and you click on this and you're using ADP and you put in your credentials for that. Now the attackers have credentials to your system, or even payroll or anything like that. They can get in and do quite a bit of damage like that. Again, if you look at this, the reply being message@adpr.com is a dead giveaway. Same as if you hover over the link right there, you're going to see something different than what they're presenting to you. So there are ways to tell this. They're just not as easy as they used to be. Now, another super popular one that we've been seeing for a long time, these are the package or parcel delivery phishes, right? This one had a FedEx logo in there. These are actually based on real notifications from FedEx. So the attackers will get a hold of these and they'll change things around as far as where it's linking to and things like that. But they actually use the real ones as templates. That's what makes them so effective, right? Organizations are always, always, always having this sort of thing coming in. Now, what's interesting on this one, if you look at it, again, the reply to address is test1@merchminer.com. I got news for you. FedEx has their own domain, so it's not going to come from something like that. Again, if you hover over the link, it's going to go to one of several different things. It just depends on what they use it for. They will use the same template for different attacks based on what they're trying to accomplish there. Now, another one that we see, I've been seeing this one over and over and over again lately. This has been going on quite a bit. There's some minor variations to this, but they're looking for gift cards. So in this case, probably, it's from executive right? Some of this has been changed to, keep the innocent out of trouble. But, hi Liz, we need you to make a purchase of iTunes gift card this morning. It's a gift card for a vendor. Are you available, right? It's usually coming from an executive going to somebody who, an office manager or something like that. We see other variations of this. One that I've been seeing quite a bit lately is we're going to give a bunch of employees $500 gift cards for being great employees. Need you to go down, pick these up. Pick up 7 of them and keep 1 for yourself. Okay, so this is playing on the, ooh, cool, I got $500, and they're already feeling good about it. They'll go out, they'll make this purchase. They usually ask them to scratch off the numbers and send them to them right away because they have to get them there or to these people right away. And then lo and behold, obviously it wasn't a real, it wasn't really a request. Now, it gets a little weird here when it comes to who covers this for insurance, right? If you have an organization and you've just lost $3,000, do you think your insurance company is going to pay for it? Probably not, because a human took this and did an intentional action. So a lot of times they get stuck holding the bag. I even heard of a person around the holidays that got hit with this, and what they wanted to do, or what they did, is they charged it on their personal credit card, and they were going to do a reimbursement, so then they get points, flight points or whatever for the purchase. And the company said, we're not paying you back for that. You did this, it wasn't by policy. So this impacts people a lot. We are seeing a huge number of these sorts of things. I will tell you that if you see anyone requesting gift cards, be very, very, very cautious, because this is like the currency that people use. In addition, if the IRS ever calls you and says, we're going to throw you in jail because you owe money, you have to pay us in iTunes gift cards by the end of this shift, run. It's not real. It's amazing still, though, how many people fall for that. And again, if you apply critical thinking, you go, okay, well, the IRS is probably not going to take iTunes gift cards, right? It makes sense to us. But the victims of this feel like, oh my gosh, the IRS is calling me. This is going to be a problem. It gets really, really scary for them. So they just bypass all that critical thinking. And next thing you know, the bad guys have all kinds of iTunes gift cards. Another one that we're seeing, which is kind of cool, payroll redirection. We're seeing people, though they do this with executives still a lot. Because nobody in HR wants to push back against executives. But it'll come in and it'll say something, to this extent. I just got a new bank account for whatever reason. There's usually a reason behind it. I need to change my direct deposit info. I need to do this right away. Okay. Now, for an average employee, your group may push back and say, hey, you can go do this out on the portal. For an executive, oftentimes they'll do it for them. And we keep seeing this happen. That, or they'll send something similar and they'll say, I want you to send me my last 3 paycheck stubs. And again, because of the authority of the executive, they don't want to push back on that. And they don't want to say, sir or ma'am, go take care of it yourself. They instead send this out. Well, what can you do with 3 paycheck stubs from a person, right? You can open accounts. You can do all kinds of stuff. They probably got your social security number. They know how much money you're making. You can do all kinds of fraudulent stuff with that. So we see a couple of these that are revolving around payroll right now. And again, if you look at these ones here have nothing to do with technology. They have no links in them. They have no infected documents. These ones here are purely going after the humans and leveraging the authority that the executives have to get them to take an action. And then here's another example of what I was talking about here earlier with the business email compromise wire transfer fraud. Reading from the bottom up, it starts off simple. Are you in the office? And keep in mind, this is a real email that was here. Are you in the office? And then the person replies and says yes. And the response to that is, okay, I need a payment processed, blah, 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 blah. It all happens very, very quickly. Next thing you know, this stuff's all gone. But this is an actual attack. This is how they happen. And this is how quickly they kind of respond to this sort of thing. Now, this one always fascinates me. It's more science than you think when we're looking at clickbait. Now, pretty much everybody's seen these ads at the bottom of websites these days. The media, pretty much any website you go to is packed with these kind of ads. Well, there's actually a lot of science behind these. What they do is they leverage what's called pattern interruption to create curiosity based on what's called the information gap theory, right? You can read the Carnegie Mellon explanation there, but basically what it boils down to is they give you a little bit of information, enough to make you curious, and then keep you from getting the answer, okay? This has become especially effective in these days where we're used to having information on the tips of our fingers right now. Also in a social culture, a social media culture like we have now, you don't want to be that person that doesn't get the joke or doesn't understand the reference because you missed out on something, right? There's a lot of pressure that gets on people for that. So these actually leverage that. You won't believe what they caught the cashiers doing at this supermarket. Watch closely. That's telling you that something is going on, and they put these arbitrary arrows and markings and things like that on here to get you hooked. You're like, what is this? I can't see it, right? It's incredibly effective. A lot of these also leverage outrage and anger. Now, the 2 strongest human emotions that make you take action are outrage and anger. So you'll see some of these sometimes that are set up, especially around political stuff, to get people mad, to get people upset, to get people to click on these things. And then it's like, I can't believe this. If you want to save the world, go do this petition, and they'll send you and they'll have you enter a bunch of personal information you normally wouldn't do because you think that you're doing a petition, right? These sorts of things are being used over and over again. The one on the bottom left there, I just love because it's 5 things you need to know about clickbait. Number 4 will blow your mind. That's actually a clickbait ad about clickbait. I think that's amazing that they did that. So what do we do to defend against this? Well, first of all, we have to understand how these attacks are coming in. We have to be aware of what is going on with this. Every quarter we do an infographic. This is just a quick one from Q4 here. What you'll notice here is these are click rates. on these different types of emails, you'll notice that there's a 39% click rate on LinkedIn emails. And just so you know, these are the ones that we send as simulated phishing attacks. They get people to do things, right? So 39% click rate on average on LinkedIn. If you look at a lot of these, they're leveraging some sort of fear and urgency with this, right? Password change or primary email change. These are things that are sent. They look like they're coming from Facebook, and they're designed to get you to go, whoa, I didn't change my password. I need to, somebody's trying to hack my stuff. And then they click these links, go in, enter their actual password, and it's bad things, right? A friend tagged a photo of you. Those make people wonder, gosh, what was I in? Those sorts of things. For me, the 55th anniversary and free pizza one would get me every stinking time, right? We actually find that food-based ones get people to let their guard down, and they click quite a bit. Same with gift cards. So what we need to understand is, are we being manipulated? This is where we defend against these sorts of things, and we have to be able to recognize that. So to do that, we have to understand the lures. What are they using? What are they doing? Well, greed, curiosity, self-interest, urgency will be in every single one of these. I have yet to see a phishing email that doesn't have some sort of urgency. It can be fear, but it can also be the helpfulness piece of it too. So basically what this boils down to, and what I like to tell people is, if you get an email and it gives you an emotional response, that doesn't automatically mean that it's a phishing email or you know, somebody's trying to trick you into something. But if it elicits an emotional response, take a deep breath, give it a couple of seconds, and look at that critically. Try to decide, try to determine if this could be an attack. Because very often, once we apply those first three principles of looking at the situation, looking where we are in the situation and making that decision, once we apply that critical thinking, we can spot these things a whole lot easier. So that's what I like to tell people. Make sure that if it inspires that you know, that response, that you pay attention. Now, we also need to understand, and we need to look in the mirror and be very honest with ourselves and say, what are the things that I would fall for? How could people distract me? Am I the kind of person that's going to, you know, back away if somebody gets aggressive with me? Or am I going to be the kind of person that, you know, is affected by other things, by somebody with a sob story, and they need help getting their money out of this war-torn country, right? Whatever it may be. You need to put the spotlight on that. You need to understand that about yourself and keep that in mind when you're interacting with these things. It's the same thing we teach users. Keep this sort of thing in mind because it can really impact with a little bit of self-awareness how much they can fall victim to this. Now, one of the things that we do within the organization is we teach on what we call 22 red flags, right? This is a piece of it here. But basically, it's these key things. And you stack up a couple of these red flags, and you should really be cautious about what's going on. And the example I like to use for folks is, look, if I get an email at 2 o'clock in the morning from the HR department, and that's unusual, I need to pay special attention to this, right? It's unusual. It's not right. I need to check this out. Again, if you get things at weird times, you know, if you get it from people that you never hear from, you know, some organizations, they don't ever send information from like HR at whatever the company is. They send it from an individual or vice versa, right? If you get it the other way, that would be unusual. Time to pay attention to that. So when we talk about training people to try to spot these things, this is one of the key things that we focus on with this, is these red flags. And again, no single one of these is usually something that's going to be a showstopper. But what happens is you stack up a couple of these and you can really see it start coming together and start, you know, picking it apart. Now, one of the biggest things that we deal with, or that I dealt with in my years in IT, is that, and I'll be the first to admit I kind of had this this mindset when I first started, and that is that we can't teach users, that they're not trainable, that, you know, we're never going to get the users to do the right thing. And I can tell you through my personal experience and through what I see here where I'm at, that's not true. Now, what happens is, as security professionals and IT professionals, most of the time we're not hired into our positions because of our people skills, let's be honest about that, or because we like working with people. We didn't accept the job because we like working with humans, right? However, in this day and age, it's actually a very important thing to make sure that your people are trained and knowledgeable on these sorts of attacks, okay? If you do it right, if we put a couple of things in place here, we can actually get people to learn. And I'm not a huge social person, but I actually like doing this sort of thing now because I've seen the results. Now, this is just to give you an idea of effectiveness when people talk about you can't train users. 6 million users, this is 11,000 organizations. An average click rate for 11,000 organizations when we begin is about 27%. Now, in about 90 days, you can train them down and get them clicking at about 13%. It's important to do some things. You don't train once a year and expect it to carry on, right? That's where the phishing comes in. And I recommend people do something like maybe quarterly. Get them some short training. You do like one big one once a year, and then you do 3 to 5 minutes every quarter or so. So anyways, that drops it down about 13% in 3 months. What we found is 6 million people at the end of a year, we're actually down to a 2% click rate, which is surprising. But the reason I show this to you again is because you can get people to make big changes. It is very, very possible. We have to keep that in mind. Sometimes it's frustrating. It's not always easy for us. But the payback for this sort of thing, for handling the human side of things when it comes to our security programs, is actually huge. Now, I'll look at this just real quick with you guys. This is a larger breakdown of that same study with the 27% click rate. If you look at the smaller organizations like energy and utilities, 31.5%. Manufacturing, also, they get hammered really hard by phishing, by ransomware. They've been in bad places with that. 33% for the small organizations. I mean, none of these are pretty numbers. If you think about this from a security standpoint, and you have a security control that fails 31% of the time, aren't you going to do something about that security control, right? That's the mindset that I have. I'm a very numbers-based person. I look at my organization and the structures and where we have security issues, and I'm going to look at it from the numbers, right? And try to attack those that are the biggest threat. Now, what's cool is, again, through training individuals, it drops down pretty quick. What I do think is interesting sometimes is on the very, very large organizations, they're a little bit slower to get moving, but that's because what you're trying to apply here is a cultural shift in your organization that gets them thinking about security right up front. And then again, the final step here, it's a pretty big drop when it comes down to it. So again, I want you to understand this is something that you can do, and you really need to think about when you're out there running your security programs, when you're out there in the field and you're doing this. Don't get dazzled by all the blinky boxes and forget your people. You can train them on your own. This is a 4-step process that we use, and you don't have to use our product. You don't have to do any of that. But remember these 4 steps. Basically, get a baseline test, and this means sending phishing emails to people. Right? So start off, see how bad you are, like that first one there. It's always important to measure what you do. And I don't care if this is in the training piece. I don't care if this is when you deploy new security controls. It's always important to understand if what you did is actually making an impact. So you get a quantitative number here, not a qualitative number, but a quantitative number. Then in this case, you're going to train your people. Teach them better password hygiene. Make it relevant to them. Make it, use examples that are going to resonate with them, and remind them that what you teach them there will keep them safe from scams and stuff at home. That'll go a long way towards getting them more interested and involved in the training and caring, right? If it's just the company, they don't always connect. But if it's something that you're doing to save them from something, that can have a big difference. Now, the next step is you do these simulated phishing attacks. That, again, that gets them used to seeing these examples that we were showing earlier and these types of things. And the idea behind this is you send these attacks, you make them a little paranoid. They see something that seems a little odd with those red flags. They go, you know what? I think maybe this is a little bit odd, right? And they're awesome. They're automatically keyed into it. They're thinking about that, so it keeps them a little bit paranoid. So they see that and they go, I wonder if this is one of those fake ones. Well, if it's not, great, you stopped a real one, right? If it is, then great, nobody's hurt. If they mess up on a simulated phishing attack, it doesn't hurt anyone, right? It's a fail-safe environment. Now, the final step is the one that I see where people fall down all the time when it comes to doing training programs, and that is looking at the results. Far too often, they just put these things in place and they hope for the best, right? We have to measure these results. That's another place the phishing comes in. So as you see people are getting better, then you turn around and you make those phishing attacks a little bit tougher. And I recommend to people they do it at least once a month. That's where we see the return on investment really happen. But you keep making them tougher, and you look for areas where, if all of your people are falling for food-based ones, maybe you need to make an adjustment in your cafeteria or something like that, right? Or you keep hitting them with some of these ones here till they're now immune to those sorts of things or inoculated to them. So it is vitally important to do the measurement piece again in any security control you have in your environments, so that you see if what you're doing is actually making an improvement. It's far too easy for us to get dazzled by the latest, greatest, deploy it, and find out that it really didn't do anything but absorb more of our time, which is, as you all know, a very precious resource in the security industry. So that being said, that's all I got for slides. I'm open for questions right now. Do we have anything? Any questions for us?
So if you got any questions, just type them in the chat box and I'll presenter.
Yeah, so, like I was saying in here, this is definitely one of those things where technical controls are used effectively to reduce like sheer volumes of these sorts of attacks that are happening, these phishing attacks. But the really, really focused ones, the ones where they really start targeting people, tend to sail right through those. So that's why I'm such a big advocate of remembering the human side. Um, multi-factor authentication for accounts can help save you. Even things like policy, which is something that we as security professionals forget far too often. So having a policy that says we will not transfer a large amount of money, and you have to define what that is, but nobody transfers a large amount of money without actually picking up the phone and calling the requester on a known good number. In other words, you don't use a number in the email, but you make sure your CFO, you make sure your CEO and all the executives know if they make a request, you're not sending the money until you call them and say, sir, ma'am, I just wanted to make sure this was you. Okay, great. That's a policy control that will have a huge impact on your security when it comes to those types of attacks too. So, Gus, we got anything in there yet?
Yeah, we got a question. So how long on average does it take for companies to notice accounts payable fraud or just fraud in general?
That's a tough one. Unfortunately, what happens on that is a lot of times, like in the invoice fraud, they won't notice it for a long time. And something that another type of invoice fraud that happens is the attackers will take over an email account by getting the credentials, right? And they'll sit there and they'll watch emails go back and forth in this account. And when it comes time to generate an invoice or to pay an invoice, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll pop in like early before the other organization gets a chance, the real vendor gets a chance. But they'll send an email and say, okay, I need you to send this payment to this account number, right? So they also control that mailbox. So they'll delete other emails that are coming and going as needed. Well, by the time the other side realizes, hey, we haven't gotten paid, the bad guy's gone, and then they start hitting up the other company and going, hey, you never paid this invoice. And they're going, yeah, we did pay this invoice. And we have the email trail to back it and your receipt and all that kind of good stuff. So that can take, a long time until you're 30, 60 days past the payment due point before that kind of stuff really happens. So unfortunately, this stuff is noticed a little bit late far too often. Now, in some of those wire transfer fraud deals, they'll pick them up pretty soon. So the executive comes back in the office or the person ends up calling them or talking to them in another discussion, say, hey, I did what you said. Those can sometimes be recovered, but what happens is if you don't get on them pretty quick, those transfers go through a process that it's fairly complicated. It's the SWIFT process here. And the bad guys will actually sometimes pull money out in the middle of that. So they'll get a transfer to another bank in the U.S. They'll withdraw the cash and then go and start another transfer somewhere else, which breaks the cycle. And it takes a while to get caught up. By the time it gets offshore, it's usually too late. So generally what they say is if you can start, if you know within the first 24 to 48 hours, you're more likely to get some funds back, but that is never a guarantee.
All right. Your audio is kind of funky again. But so any recommendations to reading to learn more about social engineering? You recommend any books or?
Oh yeah, there's some pretty cool stuff out there on social engineering. One of the partners of our organization is a guy named Kevin Mitnick. He wrote Ghost in the Wires and a lot of different books. He's a fairly well-known social engineer. He was actually got himself in a bit of trouble in his younger years. But those are some pretty interesting books. Art of Deception and Ghost in the Wires. If you look at the story of Frank Abagnale, you can learn a lot about social engineering if you know who he is. He's the guy from Catch Me If You Can. I've met him a couple of times. Really nice guy, works at the FBI now. Now, current sorts of things, if you look at it's social-engineer.org, I think it is, a guy named Chris Hadnaggy. He does a lot in this. Chris is a great guy. He runs those social engineering CTFs, and he has a ton of information on social engineering. He's actually done the social engineering framework. Really, really nice guy. Very, very helpful. You can catch him on Twitter. I do a lot of stuff on Twitter and follow people on Twitter that have a lot of good information out there. There's a lot of good resources for what's called open source intelligence, which is where you gather the information before the attack. There's a guy named Joe Gray. He goes by at C3, I think it's _PO or C3P Joe. Anyways, Joe Gray, he does a lot of stuff on that with the open source intelligence piece. And he's actually won, I know he won the inaugural DerbyCon social engineering CTF. So there's a lot of cool people that you can follow on there with trends and stuff like that. There's also a Slack channel called SE-International. It's Social Engineering International. And they're constantly posting up things. And if you look at the slides here, I'm hoping we can make these available. But in some of those emails that I showed earlier, that's the source. You can actually, people go up there and they're reporting ongoing attacks and what they're seeing. Romance scams, gift card stuff, all of that stuff. So you can actually see where people are taking and redacting these emails and putting them up there with the latest sorts of attacks. To me, it's fascinating to watch how this is evolving.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. So I'd like to thank you for, I'd like to thank the presenter for today for sharing his knowledge and everyone in attendance. And for those who want to share or view this webcast again, will be posted on our YouTube page in the coming days. Again, thanks again for presenting with us and everybody in attendance.